Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Reverend Jackson. It's an enormous honor to be here speaking this morning. I want you to share with me something of a fantasy, an imagination. Imagine for a moment that Dr. King is still alive. It is not so impossible a thought. He would be 91 years old. Imagine that he is here with us and that the breakfast is over. He would leave this room and walk upstairs, walk out the front door of the Hyatt Regency, and he'd be on Wacker Drive. If he looked to the north, he would see the Apple Store and all of Michigan Avenue beyond that. If he looked to the west, he would see the new Riverwalk leading out to Wolf Point. Beautiful buildings of offices and residences all along the river. If he just walked down to the end of the block and stood at Michigan Avenue and Wacker at that corner, and if he looked south, he would see Millennium Park. And again, the splendor of Chicago leading out to McCormick Place. I imagine that Dr. King would not recognize this city. After having lived here and bringing his family to live here, he would see 50+ years of change that have revitalized and transformed part of the Chicago he once knew. This is a very different city that has prospered, been transformed, and renewed. I would think that these changes would have been unimaginable to Dr. King. But here is the flip side, the dark side. If he were to return to the old neighborhoods in which he did his greatest work, the south side and the west side of this city, he would immediately recognize that Chicago. That Chicago has not been transformed. If anything, it is worse today than it was 55 years ago. But I don't think he would be surprised. He recognized the great entrenched disparities of American society. He spoke of skyscrapers among slums and jet planes roaring over ghettos. Dr. King called out the great dangers of economic disparity in his time, and we here know that those gaps and gulfs have become all the greater in these 50+ years. In his Nobel Prize speech, he said, I quote, "The problem of poverty is seen in the great economic gaps within the rich nations themselves," unquote. And in this particularly rich nation, perhaps the richest, Dr. King would recognize a growing crisis, both of economics and morality. He continued to say, quote, "The time has come for an all-out war against poverty. The rich nations must use their vast resources of wealth to develop the underdeveloped, school the unschooled, and feed the unfed. Ultimately, a great nation is a compassionate nation," unquote. But compassion cannot be monetized, and so too much of our society ascribes no value to it. Dr. King had a radical and far-reaching criticism of America. He knew that American society had deep endemic problems that applied everywhere in this land. There are those who would like to present us with a sanitized and moderate version of Dr. King's work and philosophy. But as Reverend Jackson said, that is a great disservice to his passionate and critical analysis of our society. He came to Chicago to do battle against widespread school segregation. He took on the realtors and bankers who divided this city by race. He fought those in political power for equal rights and opportunities. And he embraced nonviolence as an activist committed to changing American society. He believed in a guaranteed middle-class income for all as a way to eradicate poverty in this wealthy nation. Dr. King was not a naive innocent. He understood the need to use power and influence. But he said, again quoting, "When I talk about power and the need for power, I'm talking in terms of the need for power to bring about the political and economic changes necessary to make the good life a reality. I do not think of political power as an end, neither do I think of economic power as an end. They are ingredients in the objective that we seek in life. And I think that objective is truly brotherly society, the creation of the beloved community," unquote. And most radical of all, he was ready to sacrifice himself for those greater goods. He said, "I choose to identify with the underprivileged. I choose to identify with the poor. I choose to give my life for the hungry. I choose to give my life for those who have been left out of the sunlight of opportunity. I choose to live for and with those who find themselves seeing life as a long and desolate corridor with no exit sign. This is the way I'm going. If it means suffering a little bit, I'm going that way. If it means sacrifices, I'm going that way. If it means dying for them, I'm going that way because I heard a voice saying, 'Do something for others,'" unquote. It is far too easy for us sitting here to celebrate some extraordinary accomplishments. Once again, look at this city itself. Chicago is prosperous with a new urbanization, corporate headquarters, and high-tech firms providing new jobs and opportunities within walking distance of where we sit here this morning. Politically, we have come a very long way indeed. We are honored that Mayor Lori Lightfoot is here, and she is the heir to Mayor Harold Washington. Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle is also present. State's Attorney Kim Foxx as well. This remarkable city produced Barack Obama. And all of those victories would have been beyond the imagination of Dr. King. But those accomplishments cannot lead us to complacency or passivity. Much has been achieved, but Dr. King's greatest concerns have not been met. We are living in a nation that is more divided than ever, and where the battles that we thought we had won are now being overturned on a daily basis. The hard-won victories of the civil rights era are under continual attack. Voting rights are threatened by the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, voter suppression, intimidation, and manipulation. Our public schools are being decimated by a Department of Education that undermines the values of universal equal education. The Department of Housing and Urban Development seeks to raise rent on 4 million low-income households that receive federal rental assistance. The Department of Agriculture has proposed toughening access to food stamps and free school meals. Nearly 3 million people would lose food stamps, and 1 million children would lose automatic eligibility for free or reduced price school meals. The story is told of a visit Dr. King made to a small rural elementary school in the Deep South. As he stepped into the classroom, he saw the teacher take a few apples and a handful of nuts out of a bag. She cut each apple into quarters and gave each child a slice of the fruit and a few nuts. Dr. King realized that at least for some of those children, this might be their only meal. He quickly left the classroom and went outside so the children would not see him crying. As I quoted him above, ultimately, a great nation is a compassionate nation. What happens to America when we lose our compassion? On April 4th, 1967, a year before his death, Dr. King delivered the most politically charged speech of his life at Riverside Church in Manhattan. The New York Times called it a blistering attack on the government's conduct of the Vietnam War. He condemned the military adventurism of his time, and now today we fear that bombastic posturing, impulsive, provocative acts of belligerence may bring us into a new, more dangerous set of conflicts. Racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, misogyny, xenophobia, hatred of LGBTQ people were not defeated in the years since Dr. King's assassination. The white supremacists who are the inheritors of Gage Park, Marquette Park, and Cicero, as well as of Montgomery, Birmingham, Memphis, and elsewhere, are still with us. And when 9 African-American churchgoers were massacred at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, we had a president at that time who led this nation in the singing of Amazing Grace in order to heal our wounds. No such response followed the murderous Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. The Klan, neo-Nazis, and white supremacists have been given new permission to emerge from beneath their rocks by a selfless rhetoric of hate and disunity emanating from the top political office of our nation. So, in Dr. King's words, where do we go from here? The founding motto of Southern Christian Leadership Conference was to save the soul of America. And that is what Dr. King would ask us to do in his name. He would want us to organize, register, get out the vote. He would want us to fight the battles against those who would turn the clock back and overturn the moral victories and achievements that were won. You may wonder what a white rabbi from the suburbs is doing addressing all of you on this day, honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I wondered the same thing. But let me suggest that an answer of sorts. Each week, Jews read the lessons from the Torah, the 5 books of Moses. The Torah is read in a cycle, beginning with the book of Genesis, ending with the book of Deuteronomy. As it happens, we have just begun to read the book of Exodus, starting with the story of the enslavement in Egypt and liberation and freedom under the leadership of Moses. 36 times in the Torah we are taught, never forget that you were slaves in the land of Egypt. Always remember that you were strangers and outcasts in a strange land. And then the command is always followed by a therefore. But the Hebrew Bible never says, therefore hate the Egyptians. Rather, the therefore is that we are never to forget what it felt like to be slaves, outcasts, and strangers, so that we would know the plight of the slave, and thus always treat the stranger in our land as a native, defend the rights of the outcast, and fight for the rights of the oppressed. Those teachings drew Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Aller Lowenstein, Rabbi Maurice Eisendrath, Rabbi Bob Marks of Chicago, and so many others to follow Dr. King and to march with him, arm in arm. Many shared jail cells with him in Birmingham, Alabama, Jackson, Mississippi, and elsewhere. A shared devotion to equality drew Michael Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, and James Chaney together in their martyrdom. Dr. King asked Rabbi Prinz to stand on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with him at the March on Washington and speak from his experience as the rabbi of Berlin, the time of the rise of Nazism. Today, we must maintain that shared commitment to fight racism and anti-Semitism together. The coalition of blacks and Jews has not only been about Jews supporting blacks, but rather has been a source of mutual comfort and support. In October of 2018, 11 Jewish worshipers were slaughtered by a white supremacist at Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. I grew up in Squirrel Hill in Pittsburgh. Tree of Life was the congregation where my parents were married and was the spiritual home of my grandparents and much of my family. Following that horrific event, there was an interfaith worship gathering at my synagogue in Wilmette. Our congregation was joined by local clergy and members of the Christian, Muslim, and Baha'i communities. But most importantly, Reverend Jackson also joined us that night. Without fanfare, with humility, as a sign of his solidarity and friendship. That night, Reverend Jackson spoke movingly of our joint history, listing some of those same names I mentioned above. I will be forever grateful for his participation that evening and for his continued encouragement, inspiration, and friendship. Let us now imagine what Dr. King might find in a visit to Chicago 50 years from now. In these next 50 years, can we build a city in which all the neighborhoods share in the downtown's prosperity? Will economic opportunity be available to all its residents? Working together, we can share a vision of Chicago that is achievable if we but rededicate ourselves to carrying Dr. King's struggle on behalf of all who were denied their dignity as human beings equally created in the image of God. In February, Mayor Lightfoot will be hosting a summit on reducing poverty in the city of Chicago. This is a key priority of the Lightfoot administration. It is intended to shine a spotlight on the issue of poverty in Chicago and will launch a new coalition that hopes to inspire, activate, and work together to alleviate poverty in Chicago and ultimately serve as a model for our nation. So it is up to all of us, both individually and collectively, to continue this fight. We have much work to do to make real the visionary dream of Dr. King, but we cannot give up, even in the face of great opposition. Let us always remember that the challenges ahead of us are not nearly as powerful as the forces behind us. In this city and far beyond, we honor Dr. King by joining together to build a world of justice, equality, and peace. Let me conclude with these words of Dr. King. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Keep hope alive.